Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be in the world. My name is Tejas Chopra, and today I'll be talking about cloud microservices for the next billion users. I am a senior software engineer at Netflix. The agenda for my conversation today is we'll go over a brief introduction about myself, what I do. Then we'll get into the problem space definition. Finally, we will get into defining some of the requirements and how we ideated towards a solution, some of the design choices that were made in the process, and how using agile methodologies, we can arrive at a reasonable solution for our users. Finally, some results and takeaways. What you see here in this picture is actually a retail store in India. And this is similar to the supermarkets that you see in the US and in Europe. If you can see here, it's highly fragmented and there is very little cataloging done in the retail stores. And my talk is focusing on how I tried to solve this problem. So in order to reduce food wastage and how this impacts more than a population of more than 1 billion people. I'll go over a brief introduction about myself, and the way I've tried to structure this talk is we'll go over the entire talk and then I will reserve some time in the end for some questions. So I started in the year 2010 when I came to the US for my master's degree from Carnegie Mellon University. I got a master's in electrical and computer engineering with a specialization in computer systems. From the year 2012 to 2016, I was at Apple and Samsung, where I was working on distributed systems. In the year 2016, I joined a startup where I was the first hire. And what I was trying to do is I was trying to build a marketplace for FMCG. FMCG is fast moving consumer goods. So just like Amazon is a marketplace for goods, I'll get into what fast moving consumer goods are. That was the goal, to build a marketplace where you have buyers on one end and the sellers on the other end. And the idea was to build software for the masses. In the year 2017, between 2017 to 2019, I joined a startup called Datrium, where I was working on distributed file systems, storage, replication, and then Box, where I was working mostly on cloud storage. In the year 2020, I joined Netflix. Netflix produces movies and it streams movies. So there are two parts to Netflix. There's a streaming component and there's a studio component that produces movies. I work with the data storage platform group, which provides storage infrastructure and solutions for streaming and for studios. It handles around exabytes of data and billions of assets that are produced by these platforms. Let us now get into the problem space definition. So when we look at fast moving consumer goods, the problem space we were trying to attack was packaged goods, beverages, food items, and cosmetics. In India, you will find towns and cities that are littered with millions of these mom and pop shops. And they are small and medium enterprises compared to the Macy's and the Targets that you find in the US. The market cap for this industry is actually $50 billion per year. In the traditional sense, for this industry, the buyers are retail shop owners and the sellers are wholesale traders. As you can see, there are a few number of certified sellers, but a large number of buyers that actually serve a population of more than 1 billion people. So any dent that we make in this space impacts 1 billion people. The problem in this space is that there's a lot of wastage. Now, if you just quantify the food wastage, it is around 70 tons per year. So if we can use technology to avoid this food wastage, that would take us further in our goal of trying to just remove wastage in general for food. So there are reasons for this wastage. First, last mile delivery is very untimely. It results in wastage of perishable items. Second, there is no feedback mechanism from the buyer to the seller. And so there is no good way to capture the feedback from the end users of the product and pass it on to the seller. Third, there is no maintenance of catalog for items in a store. So that results in a lot of wastage as well. Fourth, there are deeply entrenched relationships between buyers and sellers. So the buyers do not have the means to explore other sellers around them and maybe seek better offers and faster service. So what if we could prevent this food loss? What if, like Amazon, we can create a marketplace for wholesale traders as the sellers and retail shop owners as the buyers? This will give buyers a choice and sellers a great platform to expand into other buyers. Choice is good. It will help uncover better deals, timely deliveries, and better user experience. The feedback mechanism that was missing can actually be integrated into the product. Users can have the ability to search for offers. To remove the issues with last mile delivery, we handle the shipping. And since this industry will almost always have bulk orders in a transaction, the shipping cost can get amortized very well. Since we are attacking a domain where the users are not very tech savvy, it is important to build an empathetic user experience from the ground up. And this is something that I focused on. And I used a bunch of technologies such as Elasticsearch, Kafka, cloud services in order to get closer to the user and to build systems and software that can have great user experience. So when you think about the users, there are a lot of challenges that we face with our users. Users have never used a smartphone. So actually they do not know much about Android apps or how a smartphone works. The second is that this particular industry works on extremely razor thin margins. So battery life of the phone is very critical to them. And therefore we have to make software that does not drain a lot of battery by doing a lot of networking calls or fetching from the cloud. A lot of caching had to be employed to do that. Third, people in at least the user base that I was trying to attack was not very familiarized with English as the first language. So I had to translate all of the products that were being shown to the user into their localized languages so that they can understand and then place orders for these products. Concepts such as cart, order tracking, and history that we are very familiar with when using Amazon and other marketplaces, our users were not familiar with these ideas. So for them, when they had to place an order, we had to introduce stuff such as swiping on the right to just place the order, etc. So that's how we were trying to deal with this. And finally, our users do not the experience when I looked at the user interacting with the software, I realized that they do not care about what is written as much as they care about the image of the product. So having larger images of the products compared to larger texts or a lot of text information was more important to them. So this is how we cannot apply the principles that work for generic marketplaces to all domains. This is where understanding the user, understanding the way they use your product comes into play. The first step towards architecting microservices is to define the requirements. So when you think about a marketplace where you have buyers and sellers, what are some of the table stakes? The ability to search for products, get their relevant information and images. Having an order management system that can give you ability to add items to a cart, track order history, etc. is again critical. Ability to have authentication and notifications for the users. Showing offers and provided by different sellers. And finally, having a seller portal, which is on the other side of the table, which allows sellers to ingest products and offers, obtain like track the shipments, generate invoices, and obtain order information from customers. Those are some of the things that you have to build if you have to create a marketplace. We went with some initial design choices. So we went with cloud native. Cloud provides scale, ease of manageability, and pay-per-use. It is ideal for bootstrapping an idea, and we went with AWS as the cloud provider. We leveraged DynamoDB NoSQL database for our products, orders, notifications, and shipments. The data was unstructured initially, and we'll get into why this data is unstructured as well. We wanted to use DynamoDB because DynamoDB comes with DynamoDB streams that was actually capturing any change data capture from the tables. And any changes that are made to the table, any insertions, deletions would be captured by an event stream. And then we can use this event stream to power our downstream services. We dabbled between using Kinesis and Kafka for event handling and async processing. And this is needed to populate downstream services, like I explained, such as Elasticsearch and other tables. We needed a way to capture metrics to get customer insights. For example, what are the products that they're adding to the cart? What products are ordered more in the summer season, etc. So Redshift was our data warehouse, and it actually fits very well with DynamoDB and Kinesis. So the entire pipeline was developed on cloud, and you already get a lot of templates for this data. So this is how we initially started our design. Whenever you have to design software or architect software, agile and iterative processes will hold you in good stead when designing this. And that's what we did. So our pilot actually was an SMS based solution. The idea was very simple. When a user, every morning, we had a service that would send the users, our customers, an SMS. And the SMS would contain information about all the products. It was a very long and a huge SMS, and it had very little images inside it. This was just to test the waters and to see if there's a product market fit for our product. Also, SMS meant that they did not need to have a smartphone, so they could use their feature phones or the phones that they're used to in this process. However, SMS and the way it was designed is we used AWS Lambda to send an SMS every morning. The only thing is it could only scale up to 10 stores, not more than that. And sellers would upload an Excel sheet with product information, price, and quantity available in DynamoDB. And a Lambda would actually process this information every morning and send an SMS. Every evening, a human would actually create an Excel with order information and mutate the DynamoDB tables. The conclusion was that Lambda works great for time delivery of messages. Human vetting is very painful, and it must be replaced by programs. This approach is rigid because there is no offers, no real-time quantity updates being reflected, etc. Third and fourth is just that we had this pilot version gave us a great idea about the market, and we saw a huge surge in orders. We were actually doing more than $500 revenue per day just with this basic solution. So then we went into the first part of iterative development. And what we did was we actually split our seller portal and the buyer portal. So the Android app, which the buyers used, was separate, and the seller portal, which was used for ingestion, was separate. We put everything under in the AWS cloud behind an API gateway, and we would split the APIs between two different types of services. So we invoked AWS Lambda on every order. So whenever a buyer would place an order, we would invoke a Lambda function. The Lambda would actually go into the DynamoDB, fetch information, update the quantity, and then return back with the order information. This also meant that we created a basic bare bones Android app on the front end for handling this. The seller portal was actually a microservice or a service that was written, which allowed the sellers to ingest products and generate invoices. Those were the only two functionalities that we initially started with. So every morning, a seller would just have an Excel that they would pass on to this particular API in the seller portal, which would read from the Excel and populate the DynamoDB table. During the course of the day, buyers would place orders. Orders would change the amount of quantity that is needed and also generate invoices. So the sellers can then, at the end of the day, fetch these invoices for a particular buyer and then ship the items. We'll ship the items from the seller to the buyer. It works great for less than 500 orders a day. It only works for single orders. So we do not have any idea of cart or state management at this point. Users would just swipe right to place an order, and that would be the only flow that the users would interact with. The learnings were that Lambda actually has a very slow warm-up time. So order placement was actually very slow for users. So the next step of iterative development, no more Lambdas. We replaced the Lambda with a monolithic service. This monolithic service had products, order management system, notification and authentication all inside it. So it was interacting with multiple tables inside DynamoDB. And we still had the seller portal API separate from the app APIs. The framework that we used to develop this service was Dropwizard, and I'll get into what that is. There is no ability to browse or search at this point. So the sellers or the buyers would actually just scroll on the app to find the particular product, single swipe the product to place an order. And the other thing is also there was no localization. So we just had product images in English at this point. We did not get into any relationship models as well. And I'll explain what relationship models are once this actually captures the relationships between products, manufacturers, and brands, and how FMCG products have very complicated relationship handling. The third part, finally, we get to microservices. Monolithic services are difficult to scale. They're difficult to modify and test. They interact with multiple databases. So there was mixing of business logic and no clear separation of concerns. The other thing with monolithic services is that there is no fault domain. So whenever any part of the service fails, the entire service goes down, and unrelated parts may just get affected because of that. So what we did is we split the monolithic service into multiple microservices. We had product as a single microservice, order and cart management was a single microservice, notification was one, invoice was the other. Note that sometimes when we move from monolithic to microservices, people have a tendency of each microservice dealing with one table. And that's how they think about microservices. But there is a curse of too many microservices. Too many microservices are bad because you may just have service to service hops, and that may increase your latency. And some of the microservices actually live and die together. So order and cart live and die together. So it makes more sense to put them together in one microservice than have them split across microservices. So there are many reasons and rationales behind choosing the granularity of microservices. And I would say it's more of an art than a science at that point. We also wanted to use DynamoDB for DynamoDB streams. So what we did is whenever an upload or any data was ingested into DynamoDB, it would generate an event. This event was captured by Kinesis data firehose. This is, you can think of it like Kafka, which has producer as a DynamoDB event, and consumers could be written by you. These are lambdas that we wrote. These consumers' job was to process the event and then change the downstream services. So as you see here, there are three types of consumers that we employed. One of them was a catalog indexer, a Redshift indexer, and an Elasticsearch indexer. So we actually use the catalog indexer. Whenever sellers would upload a product or change the image of a product, it would index the catalog, update the product in the S3 bucket, and then reflect on the user's app as well. The Redshift indexer was to capture all of the metrics of the users. So whenever the users interacted with the app and placed an order or scrolled through products, we would capture these metrics and then update the DynamoDB table and then make it flow through the Kinesis firehose to Redshift. Redshift is a very critical piece of our infrastructure because metrics that we capture helped us to provide insights into the customer behavior and customer pattern to our sellers. And the sellers then use that to either pre-fill orders before seasonality kicks in, or to understand the nature of products that were being ordered. The third one was the Elasticsearch indexer. So we, at the end of the day, wanted to provide a similar experience as any other marketplace. So ability to search and browse is very critical. And so Elasticsearch was being used to give that, to provide that ability to our users. We used Dropwizard for cloud native microservices. Dropwizard is a framework, and it is actually a collection of services such as Jackson, Jetty, Jersey, and Metrics. Jetty is an HTTP server inside the main method. Jersey maps your REST requests to Java objects. Jackson allows for JSON serialization and deserialization. And the way Dropwizard works is that you need to create a resource class and register the resource class. And then finally, you implement different methods. So in this case, for example, you have a get method with a name parameter going to hello world. And you can implement the query param name and then get the appropriate value as a JSON. Dropwizard was a choice that I took. I could have used Spring Boot as well. And in that, actually, dependency injection comes built in. So it was a choice that I took. There's no reason why one is better than the other. Spring Boot also solves the same problem, in fact, in lesser lines of code as well. So you can choose anything to make your microservices. So let me get into the relationship modeling and the complexities of it in our domain. So when you look at things around you, for example, your iPhone, let's say, you know that the manufacturer of the iPhone is Apple. The brand is iPhone. the product vertical is smartphones. The product line is iPhone 12, and the product is iPhone 12 with its IMEI number. So for fast moving consumer goods, these attributes are not always clearly spelled out. For example, if you look at the image here, it's by a manufacturer called Procter and Gamble. Some of them you may be able to recognize. The product verticals are actually in the vertical order here. So they are baby, feminine care, family, fabric. Product lines are diapers, kitchen towels, and etc. The brands are Tide, Ariel. The products finally are Bounty, paper towels, 33% extra, large. So that's a specific product that we're talking about. As you can imagine, for food related items, the lines and the relationships between manufacturers, product verticals, product lines, and products are very thin. In order to give the users an ability to search any product, there needs to be a way to get to the product. Our biggest challenge was that because the relationships between these attributes are so dynamic in nature, how do we build a backend store to serve the complex nature of queries? We need the ability to search by brand, by manufacturer. Some of our sample queries are here. So for example, you need all the products that belong to a particular manufacturer and a brand, all the products that belong to a product vertical, and all the products that belong to a product line and a brand. And unlike marketplaces, typical marketplaces where you have a tree of this information, as you can see here, it's a graph of information. So you can have a manufacturer that has a brand and has products, or you can have a manufacturer that has a brand that is a separate product vertical and products. So it's a more convoluted in this sense. And this is where Elasticsearch came to our rescue. With Elasticsearch, you can build an index and relationships that can help serve complex queries with extremely low latencies. You can get features such as autocomplete right off the bat. And this is something we leveraged a lot with our customers. So at this point, we have a buyer's app that allows product search and browse. We also have ability for the buyers to place their objects in cart and order. We have an order management system that generates shipments, and we have order history that the buyers can look at. On the seller side, we have the ability for the sellers to ingest new products and update quantities. Sellers can also update offers for a products. And we are getting, the sellers were able to get the orders, generate invoices and shipments. And on our end, we were able to get the invoices and shipment information from the sellers, do the shipment to the buyers, and update the quantities in our app. Please note that this is just a very top level view of where the app was. There are more nitty-gritties of it, but for lack of time, I'm not getting into those at this point. So what were some of the results and takeaways for me from this particular experience? So there were a bunch of technical learnings. DynamoDB is not the best database for relationships. In fact, the nature of relationships was graph. So I should have used a graph database, such as Amazon Neptune or Neo4j that is backed by DynamoDB. If I have the DynamoDB backing for the Neptune or a Neo4j, I can actually still leverage the DynamoDB streams to power the downstream services. I used Kinesis because it was right available off the bat in AWS. But actually Kafka allows faster retrieve. It stores data for longer periods of time. Kinesis has a default of 7 days, I think, or back then it had a default of 7 days. Kafka has now matured. It also has connectors that work out of the box for DynamoDB, Redshift, and Elasticsearch. So Kafka on cloud would have been a preferred choice for me. And the only concern is that, Kinesis is managed by AWS. Kafka would have to be managed by me. So that was the only other thing to note. I did not use containerization back then. So using Docker and Kubernetes for rolling deployments is a must-have for any app that runs on cloud today. And so the CI/CD pipelines should help trigger Jenkins jobs. And Spinnaker is a tool for continuous deployment, which was actually open sourced by Netflix. That should be used for deployment and monitoring of all the containers on cloud. The other thing is that today we see a lot of use of service mesh for microservices. Service mesh is a framework that shows you how microservices talk to each other, and then you can build on top of all of those metrics. So it can tell you the failures, it can tell you the call stack, it can tell you which microservices are hot, And you can use those insights to better develop your microservices. Um, in terms of the product learnings, so like I explained, our users were not very well versed with the idea of a cart. So they would periodically just swipe right to place an order. And they were not very familiar with placing an order in a cart, and they would forget to place the order at the end of the day. So we just removed cart altogether from their interface. And what we saw was we actually had savings in shipping costs for our customers. And the way we did it was whenever the users would swipe right to place the order multiple times in a day, we would create a virtual cart on the backend. So all of these different orders would then sit in the virtual cart. And then at the end of the day, we would place that cart for the order. By aggregating these separate orders into a single cart, we saved on the shipping costs for our customers. In fact, the savings were around 27% for them. Because of our enhanced searchability, we were able to increase our orders by 24%. Like I said, products can have missing data for brands and manufacturers. So we invested in actually doing a research per product to ingest the appropriate values for brands, manufacturers, and product verticals. This was driven by customer interactions, and we asked them about the appropriate vertical, appropriate brand to place for each product. That led into enhanced connections between products and enhanced searchability. And finally, we invested a lot of money in having a data warehouse on Redshift. So that actually led to an increase in revenue by 34%. It helped determine the seasonality of orders. It gave insights into customer patterns, and it enabled our sellers to procure items in advance for fulfillment. However, with cloud, there is a, a sweet spot. When your company is small, everything is great because you have a lot of cloud credits that these cloud providers provide. But as soon as you scale, your costs will explode. And that is what we saw with Redshift as well back in 2016. Redshift has gotten better over the years with its cost modeling. So it may not be a problem these days, but it was a big problem back then. And we did not have the option of choosing Snowflake because it was still a very niche player at that point. Finally, what were some of the results that we saw in 6 months? The number of wholesale stores went from 1 to 7. The number of retail stores, which are our buyers, went from 10 to 400. We were able to capture from 7,000 insights or metrics to 780,000 metrics from Redshift. Our revenue grew from $200 per day to roughly around $8,000 per day. And finally, the topic of saving the food wastage for 1 billion users. We were actually able to save 27% of food from getting wasted because of last mile delivery and other issues. Some of my takeaways as an engineer from this experience. You should build software for the customer. You can actually go in your rabbit hole and build extremely complicated software. But as long as the user, if the user is not able to use it, then there is no point of that software. So you need to show empathy as an engineer when you're building and architecting for the customer. More code is more bugs. So there's a common adage that every 100 lines of code, there will be a bug. So if you want to reduce bugs, just write less code. Ability to write simple and lucid code is very understated, but very much important when you're writing and designing systems. There are pains of scale. As you scale systems, as you scale the number of requests, the number of network connections, things will fail. But what is important is that you should fail safe. So you should have proper defaults and fallback mechanisms. And in no way should you lose the data, so that the customer that has placed the order is expecting the order at the end of the day. So you must take care to see that even if your browse and search may fail, your order management system should not fail. Designed for performance on smartphones. So I employed strategies of caching data on smartphones to avoid the network hop and also the battery life. And also I employed techniques of compression, deduplication to reduce the footprint of the data on the smartphone. That was very critical in trying to get the data to the users and not spoiling their experience as well as impacting the battery life. Invest in learning about the business and the pain points and see if tech can solve some of them. So in the past, as an engineer, I actually just focused on the the issue and the architecture that I was responsible for. But I did not in the past go out to the end customer that is using the products, because I focus mostly on infrastructure side. So I did not realize that there are some pain points that they have that can be resolved with tech. For example, in this particular use case, like I said, cataloging is a very big problem for them. And so just by building something on top of order history, you can get an insight into what catalog the business has. So we just built some tools on top of that to provide them the ability to track their inventory. That was something that, it was not really a part of our app, but it was something that they needed. So that is a very fruitful experience as an engineer if you can provide solutions to your users. Data is gold. Invest in gathering insights from data right at the start. It is very difficult to build metrics and infrastructure for that at the once you have a lot of data out there. So it should be a first-class citizen of your app and your architecture. Cloud costs will spiral out of hand if you are not careful. So right from the get-go, you have to design intelligently for the cloud, employ caching strategies on your local machines, employ ability to send less calls over the network, use techniques such as compression, deduplication to reduce the footprint in cloud, and explore and compare the services that are provided out of the box. For example, back then, Elasticsearch by AWS was a service that AWS provided, but it was slightly more expensive than actually spinning up Elasticsearch clusters on AWS. The second thing is the Elasticsearch version that they had was slightly older compared to the open source Elasticsearch back then. So doing these comparisons as a user and as a developer is very critical in choosing the right software. That's my time. Thank you so much for listening in. Please feel free to reach out to me on my email, LinkedIn, and Twitter. And if you're looking for job opportunities in the domain of software, Netflix is hiring in the US. So please reach out to me for those as well. Thank you. And now I'll open the floor for any questions. Any questions, anyone? Cool. If there are no questions, then we will probably save some time and I'll give back some minutes to you folks. Thank you so much for being a great audience, and thank you.